I'm Tom Kinsella. Welcome. I really appreciate you showing up at this, our first Zoom programming of the semester for the Alliance Heritage Center. I'm the Elizabeth and Samuel Levin Director of the Alliance Heritage Center at Stockton. Our reading tonight is one of 3 Zoom programs related to the Alliance Colony. Our second is going to take place, just to let you know, in 3 weeks on Thursday again, March 25th at 7 p.m. Jarrett Ross will be speaking about genealogical research related specifically to Norma Alliance of Brotmanville, and he's going to be providing some research tips. And then a month after that, approximately on Thursday, April 22nd, Ray Dudo, Kelly Burns, and I, my research fellows, will be presenting more stories from the Alliance Heritage Center archives. We did that last December, and it went well, we thought, and so we thought we'd do it again. I want to just speak a few words about Jay Greenblatt, who is going to introduce Ruth. Jay is the last trustee, I believe, of the Alliance Colony Foundation, a formidable group of Alliance community members who worked to preserve the history of Alliance, Norma, and Brotmanville for quite some time. Jay's a longtime attorney with an impressive career. He's still practicing, but it's his role as a historian of Alliance with his passion to tell its stories that brings us here today. About 2 years ago, Jay gave me a call and said he knew a community member who was writing a memoir of her life, a life deeply impacted by the Alliance community. Would the Alliance Heritage Center at Stockton be interested in helping her to bring it to print? I immediately said yes, I wanted to try to do that, and began a lengthy and very lovely correspondence via email with Ruth, as she and I and student interns edited, designed, and finally published the wonderful book she's going to be reading from today. Jay has graciously agreed to say a few words of introduction to Ruth and her memoir, so I'm going to hand it off to you, Jay.
Thank you, Tom. It was at the 136th reunion that this lady came up to me and with exuberance explained her connection to Alliance to me. And that was Ruth, the daughter of Sylvia Levin Weinstein and Marty Weinstein, the granddaughter of Bessie and John Levin, and the great-granddaughter of original settlers and pioneers of the community. She's a poet. And as a poet, she uses words. And the way she uses words, and if any of you have ever heard her poetry, heard her recite her poetry or read any of her poetry, you'd know what I mean. She can provide for you in your mind's eye the most vivid pictures imaginable. I was just amazed at it in listening to the discs that she sent to me and reading some of her poetry. Well, she's transmitted that over into the prose in this book, because I lived through much of the same years that she's talking about, the middle years of the last century, when Alliance was, well, it was fading, it was leaving, the curtain was coming down, but it still was a magnet for the Jewish community that had some semblance of annexation to it. And the Norma Beach was the center of the attraction during the summer months. And she took me back to that so vividly. She doesn't just talk the talk. Ruth, excuse me. Yes, she doesn't just talk the talk. She walks the walk, as they say. Ruth and her husband, Joe McShane, have lived on a 40-acre homestead in the Arkansas Ozarks for nearly 45 years. And harkening back to an earlier time, they're still growing gardens. and living a safe and worthwhile life together. Ruth makes art. She writes poetry. Joe makes music. They both thank their ancestors for leaving a legacy of loving the land, and anything else, according to Ruth, is just absolute gravy. So with that having been said, it is my pleasure, my great pleasure, to introduce to you Ruth Weinstein.
Oh, Jay and Tom, thank you both so much. I'm just afraid I'm going to start to cry in a minute. It's been 1 year now since the launch of the book, and in that year, I've connected and reconnected with so many people, including my first cousin, Brian Ernst, who helped build the house that we've lived in for almost 44 years. In preparing for this reading, I've reread nearly the whole memoir, and a year later, I still think it's a pretty darn good book. People are always asking me to write about the past 45 years, our lives in the Ozarks, and I think I'm ready to do that now. So I'm going to read from chapter 1. And I'll be reading short segments from various chapters and then commenting on things. So this is Why on Earth Write a Memoir, an introduction. Invariably, when I meet people in Arkansas and they hear my mid-Atlantic accent, they ask the same questions. What brought you to Arkansas? And where did you grow up? And I see Blossom is asking me to control my camera. So I'll say approve, but I'm not sure.
Oh, I just keep going, Ruth.
All right. So, what brought you to Arkansas and where did you grow up? To the first question, I answer cheap land. And to the second, Northeast row house, Philadelphia, with summers in rural southern New Jersey. For longer than I can say, I have wanted to write the story of how I got from my roots to the Arkansas Ozarks by shining a light on the brief span of my summers in Norman, New Jersey. Now, close to offering it to the world, I wonder who would want to read such a memoir. I am a relic of history. An old, white, cisgendered, straight Jewish woman who, while writing this in 2018 and 2019, has been married to the same man for nearly 43 years. I have suffered neither alcoholism nor drug addiction, mental illness nor physical disability, sexual nor physical abuse. I am relatively healthy and fit, considered intelligent, but have no stellar achievements on my resume, and I am not charismatic. I am altogether too ordinary for my life to garner interest. When memoirs abound of people who have overcome almost insurmountable odds, people with major accomplishments, and people who reveal horrifically painful pasts from which they soar to great heights. My maternal ancestry, however, is part of a fascinating piece of American history. The revelation of the link that explains the atypical American back to the land lifestyle I have embraced for over 40 years, more than half my life. I am a descendant of one of 43 families who share a certain distinction. In 1882, the original settlers of the Alliance colony, our ancestors, our dear pioneers, all emigrated to escape the pogroms of Imperial Russia waged by Tsar Alexander III against the beleaguered Jews of his empire. Their arduous journey took them finally to the sandy soil of southern New Jersey, with the purpose of becoming farmers. They would not only change their location, but nearly every aspect of their lives since. With few exceptions, Jews had not been able to live as farmers in Russia for centuries. First settled in May of 1882, Alliance and local offshoot communities existed for nearly a century, sending descendants out into the world to be successful in every conceivable field of endeavor. Alone, my treasured family history would not be significant. Many of the descendants of my generation are highly accomplished and, like their ancestors, have produced a handful of American luminaries. I, however, took the literal message and history of my ancestors' migration to heart. After college graduation, I became an English teacher in the Philadelphia school system for about 8 years, but always struggled to find fulfillment and happiness. Memories of my childhood and teen summers spent in the bosom of this remarkable and nurturing community left a mark on me, a brand in my consciousness, and tugged at an unrequited longing. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Back to the Land movement, with strong parallels to my ancestors' lives, was stirring across America. I traveled to California and Montana, hoping to find people with whom to buy land. Nothing clicked until in 1974, I met Joe McShane, an Irish Catholic boy from a Philadelphia working class background, like my own parents' socioeconomic status. Joe was imbued with the same pride in his mother's farming roots in Western Ireland as I was by my mother's family's origins. We were destined to live a life together with an awareness of his family's struggles against British colonialism in County Mayo, Ireland, and my family's goals of becoming free farmers on their own soil in Pittsgrove Township, Salem County, New Jersey. Together, we have made a modest, a long and good, though very rarely easy, life on 40 hardscrabble acres in Searcy County, Arkansas. Tomatillo Ridge Farm, 2019. And Tom, if you'll show a couple pictures while I wipe my eyes and nose.
I'm right with you.
Okay.
This is just the cover of Ruth's book, but here's the first picture, Ruth.
Yes, the Levin brothers. And that's my grandfather, the left standing, the left as we view it. Okay, so now rather than read about the history, and those of you who are fellow descendants know the history. I mean, you know it almost by heart. And there are people joining us who don't know it. They're not part of that community. They're friends or relatives who really don't know about it. So instead of reading the history, I'm now going to read a poem that pretty much encapsulates the lives of our ancestors from Kiev prior to and post-emigration to Alliance. And although in the poem I claim that I learned of destinations other than New Jersey later, I always knew about the possibility of Oregon. So this is Alternate Universes Imagined. My mother's parents, children of Jewish settlers, set down near the Pine Barrens of New Jersey by the Morris River to farm sandy soil in cooperatives, had escaped the pogroms' rages in the shtetls of Kiev. New Jersey's scrub oak land and tea brown rivers still ring loud and bright in my memory cells. Years later, I learned that other lands beckoned the settlers, strong in the imaginations of the philanthropists who made their dreams possible. Oregon, where my ancestors thought they would have to defend the babes from eagles after surviving the Cossacks, and later the Argentine to become Jewish gauchos, the last of them dying out in the 21st century's beginning. The chiaroscuro of possibilities plumbs depths of the mind's options of alternate universes, and I reel to think of the other half me who might have been had my mother's grandparents been braver or waited longer to huddle in steerage and land not at Castle Garden nor Ellis Island, but at a port close to Buenos Aires, our fathers ready to wear the dashing garb of the gauchos, forelocks tucked into flat-brimmed hats, breeches flaring above spurred boots, or in Oregon, tending vineyards and shaking angry fists at hungry eagles. From all those shades of possibility, I emerged, shapes and lines drawn from the water and soil of Alliance, New Jersey. And again, rather than read from Chapter 2, The History of the Alliance Colony, Russian Jewish Life to the 1880s and the pogroms, I want to just mention the Back to the Land movement spreading among the Jews of the Russian Empire in the early 1880s, largely for those who in the audience who are new to this history. The name Am Olam literally means the eternal people, and the movement was founded in 1881 in Odessa by a few intellectuals who believed that Jews would never be respected until they owned and tilled their own land. Moses Herder was one of the founders, and it is interesting to me, as are the people who were prominent in the 1960s and 70s Back to the Land movement and environmental movement. Herder emigrated with his family first to Arkansas from New York after, leaving Russia. And they lived for about a year in eastern Arkansas, which was just an awful, awful place. And then they relocated to Carmel, New Jersey, the sister settlement of Alliance. He believed in the dignity of working with one's hands as well as developing one's mind. My great-grandparents, the Levins, and great-great-grandmother Leah Levinson were connected to Am Olam, as were Moses Bayuk and Eli Stavitsky, the two original scouts to South Jersey, and the Levins and Bayuks are connected by marriage. My grandfather grew up on Henry Avenue next to the Stavitsky family. The Stavitsky brothers were legendary in my childhood for their arrowhead collection, hunting and fishing skills, and all around mystique as farmers and woodsmen. I wish there were more time to read whole selections from chapters 2 through chapter 5, but I want to move on to my actual memories of my grandfather and childhood and teen years before wrapping up. But at this point, it's sufficient to say that all these founding families and pioneering families are my personal historic figures. So let's see, page 87 and 88. This is chapter 6, the home of John H. Levin, my redneck Zeta. I call my pop my redneck Zeta, a loving, humorous term that requires defining for the non-Jewish reader who has not had close relationships with Jewish culture. Zeta simply means grandfather in Yiddish, and most Jews of Eastern European backgrounds around my age referred to their grandfathers as Zeta and their grandmothers as Bubby. Pop rejected the language of the old world for an American title. The first 18 years of my life were anchored by significant periods in the summers and frequent weekends at my grandfather John H. Levin's farmette, where he gardened, raised fancy poultry and dairy goats at various intervals, and ran an egg route to Philadelphia. My mother, Sylvia Weinstein, and her 2 younger sisters, Jean Baline and Esther Ernst, took turns in the summers well into the 1950s to be there with their children for the sake of a close nuclear family that knew its roots. I have no memories of my grandmother, Bessie Barish Levin, living at the house. She came to the South Jersey settlement as a young teenager with her parents in the next wave of emigration from Russia, and never possessed what has always been for me the cachet of being an original settler. She died in a nursing home when I was 8 years old after years as an invalid. The stroke she had sustained left her paralyzed, but able to say my name haltingly for a while when we visited her in my earliest years. For all my life, what has persisted is the visual memory of her shorn white hair, like a paint-dried brush against her pillow. I do remember seeing among my mother's photos a few pictures of Nanny Bessie. She was cute in her youth, short, dark, and plump, with a shy, sweet smile. My mother, Sylvia, AKA Cookie, for how cute and fun she was when young, took after her mother. John Levin's home in rural South Jersey was the place where I learned the names of wildflowers. First felt the warm flank of a milk goat against my cheek and sensed with both excitement and fear the wild world beyond the sidewalks of the city. It was where the lure of the natural world declared itself a magical and mysterious realm, a world which had claimed me as one of its devotees, though it took many years for me to return to a country setting as my dwelling place. It was the place where I learned the value of cultivating a patch of wilderness in order to grow food with my own hands and of caring for animals that would provide me with milk and eggs. It declared that even with tractors and tools, even with dedication, muscle, and commitment, the effort of a human to shape a wild environment, the cultivation of a piece of land surrounded by wilderness, was a tentative and temporary endeavor. Let me see where I'm going from here. That's 80. Okay. So in the next segment, I'm going to describe something in the kitchen of my grandfather's house that I always loved. Prior to this, in the book, I describe what was then about a 2, sometimes 2.5 hour drive from Northeast Philadelphia. Especially in summer traffic, you could get stuck on the Tacony Palmyra Bridge for an hour. But now I guess 55 is, it makes it a very quick trip. Okay. Okay, this first is the yard, and then I will move on to the kitchen. Here in my enthusiasm to explode into that world, I am scattered, wanting to show you everything at once. I take your hand and pull you into the yard where the hammock hung from a post and tree, either the black walnut tree or the mulberry tree, which dropped its purple jewels in August. That I can no longer remember which tree held the hammock feels like a larger loss than it probably is, but I am distressed by my own acceptance that another memory is gone. Any ability to recall a third tree in the trio is gone as well. Maple or oak, or could it have been an evergreen? Like a precious stone from a necklace of beads, each one meaningful, a memory has rolled away and is lost to the earth, invisible in leaf litter, irretrievable from the leaves of grass. A consolation memory says there were no conifers on that side, only strong deciduous trees. The mulberries, whatever the precise location of that droop-bearing tree in the yard, we gathered and ate until our hands, faces, and bare feet were stained with their delicious juices. The primary feature of my grandfather's place was the close to 100 trees he planted over a period of about 25 years on what was probably no more than a 1-acre piece of his property. The larger trees cast shade for the kids who fought over and were forced to share the one stout canvas hammock, and for the adults in lawn chairs. The smaller trees, like the grandchildren, grew in front of everyone's eyes. He planted maples along both edges of the driveway and its arc in the back of the house, where the drive separated the house from the garage and pens of the goats and poultry. Silver maples with shaking, shimmering leaves, Norway and sugar maples too. Young weeping willows grew in the area we called the cesspool. I wonder now whether he had a septic tank and drain field, and question the sanitation of the waste drainage area. But in my childhood, I imagined it a forbidding moat and leapt easily across its narrow span to enter the privileged royal environs. In the front of the house, he planted a tulip poplar, a maple, a blue spruce in the southeast corner, and some junipers or cedars. In 1995, my brother and sister-in-law and I, returning to their home in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., from a reunion at the Jersey Shore of our father's dwindling family, took a detour to stop at the Alliance Cemetery, where our parents and grandparents are buried, and to drive past our grandfather's place. Nothing looked familiar. The asphalt business that had bought his property in the early 1960s had changed so much, including the house. Although they left many of the planted trees on the lawn and much of the wooded area, it all looked different, and we felt profound sorrow and loss. And then I cried out, "Mickey, look," and waved my hand wildly at that blue spruce tree, the only identifiable remnant of Pop's arboreal labors. And I wish my brother were still alive so that he could be here tonight. Okay. Let me see where we are now. Tom, I have just about 6:30 here, 7:30 there. So what do you think? How much more reading should I do? I can't hear you. Uh-oh.
I was muted.
Okay.
Let me show just a couple more pictures, and then I would say maybe another 15 minutes, something like that.
Okay.
You can see a picture of your grandfather here.
Yes.
And can you tell us where he's standing?
Yes, he's standing across the road from his bungalow, as far as I can tell, so that would have been on the lawn of old Mr. Berkowitz's house. And Mr. Berkowitz made kosher wine for Passover every year. And, we'd get tiny little tastes. And I know my friend Judy Lansky is here tonight. And Judy, I wish we had some of that wine for our Seder at the end of the month. That's as far as, I can tell. It must have been some big event, because I see like, thanks, Frank. Yes, I was going to say mid-50 Chevy. One of them was my brother and sister-in-law's. Yeah.
Well, and here's a picture, I believe, of your father getting ready for the Levin's Cousin Club.
Yes, at our house, our row house in Philadelphia on Sterling Street in Northeast Philadelphia, was a tiny little kitchen. My father was untrained, but he was an amazing cook. Had he had some training, he probably would have been a brilliant chef. But here he is preparing smoked fish, platters, lox, and various smoked fishes and bagels and rye bread and cream cheese and all of that.
And let me show one more, which is probably anticipating a little bit, but you'll have to describe where and who.
Sure. Yes, that's my mother, my beautiful mother, Sylvia Levin Weinstein. That's me. You can tell that it's me because of the eyebrows, same eyebrows. But I'm just a couple months. That's August. I was born in May. So this is August 1943. I was born in 1941.
And where are you?
We're at the curve in the beach.
At the North Beach.
At the Norma Beach.
Okay.
And years later, when I was an older kid and a teenager, that's where all the muck settled. The leaves, the fallen windblown leaves from the deciduous trees would disintegrate there. And the teenage boys thought it was hilarious to drag the girls, into the muck. And we all squealed and oh, Frank, thanks. So, okay, let me read just what page here. So this is about a piece of furniture in my grandfather's kitchen. Once hydrated and settled, I turned to my favorite thing in Poppy's kitchen, the queen of all dry kitchen cabinets, which occupied most of the west wall and held fascinating magical seeming kitchen tools. The cabinet, a deluxe model even then, probably became a prized possession of a 1970s back to the land hippie woman, or anyone with a country kitchen look in her or his house, coming across it in a chic, antique and collectible shop anywhere between Cape May and Philadelphia. Known as dry kitchens because of their tin bins and hoppers for flour and sugar, or as a pie safe in the South. I bought one in the late 1970s. Pop's was white and mint in condition. It had a flour bin with a sifter at one end and a sugar bin at the other. Massive and majestic to the small child I was, it lingers in my memory, its double doors filled with essential canned goods, baking supplies, and utensils between the flour and sugar bins. Not only did it have a pull-out enameled countertop, but it also possessed two other more complex mechanical wonders that always worked smoothly. It had a roll top hood to close off the recessed section behind the counter where the country wife or daughter could store her cut up fruit and other ingredients while rolling out her pie crust on the counter. I was restricted to how often I was permitted to pull this slatted feature of the dry cabinet up and down when very small, and I was too short to reach it. The bottom doors exhibited the true genius of simple mechanical design and excellent hardware. When opening both at the same time, a special hinge enabled the opening doors to pull out the main shelf inside. I believe that a row of graduated drawers flanked these wonders of kitchen engineering of that era. I spent hours in simple play with the items found in the drawers and doors, whether the old-fashioned flour sifter or the collection of glass globes from coffee percolators that had long since been discarded for a host of reasons. I imagined them as minute crystal balls that could predict the future and dressed up as a fortune teller to lend a dramatic flair to my daydreaming. I must have entertained myself from age 5 to 10 in front of that dry kitchen as I grew older and capable enough to help with cooking and baking and to attempt my own ventures at solo food preparation. I often, as I write about my grandfather's dry kitchen from the comfort of my own kitchen, warmed by a fire in the wood stove, I can visualize that treasured piece of furniture filled with mason jars, half pints, pints and quarts, packed with red and garnet colored jams and jellies, the golden greens of pickles and tomatillo salsas, the quarts of applesauce, canned tomatoes and vegetable soup. To have that cabinet packed with such a wealth of one's own labors is a symbol of deep security to me. And now I'm going to read another poem. This one's called The Legendary Tomatoes of New Jersey. The legendary tomatoes of New Jersey linger on the taste buds of my childhood memories. Their tart, sweet juice dripping warmly down my chin and arms, right in my grandfather's garden. That South Jersey sand could really grow the best asparagus, sweet corn, and tomatoes that anyone had an appetite for in the springs and summers of my youth. True, they were not grown organically, it being the 40s and 50s when DDT was king. And I don't remember the varieties of tomatoes, those little plum ones that someone's Italian grandmother turned into rich gravy, and the big hunking slicers we ate with charred, high quality burgers and grilled corn. Green ones and cukes made it into the crock with dill and garlic from my grandfather's patch, and once they were fermented just right, went into jars in the old propane fridge. The grated black radishes were eaten by the brave with rye or pumpernickel, and Aunt Lena's butter, sour cream, and cottage cheese. And my mother and her friend, the two Sylvias, dark beauties with red lipstick and cigarettes, canning peaches and tomatoes in the other Syl's kitchen. Later, laughing in their orangey red sundresses, two hot tomato young mamas, saviors of summer's bounty. And so we probably don't have time for me to read the selection from the Morris River, which describes this photograph, Tom, the one of the inner tube.
Hold on,
We've been-
I'll show it to people.
Yeah. And then
We've got about another 10 minutes Ruth, before, we're at the 50-minute mark.
okay, then let me
There's the
start.
right there.
Yes. So my brother Mickey, me in the middle, Toby Berkowitz, family friend in the front, my Aunt Jean, and my cousin Bruce. And let me find 151. Okay, so this is my childhood years, and I talk about how when we moved to Arkansas, we built our house, just the two of us by hand, no power tools. And less than a year later, it burned to the ground. And I gathered some photographs from other family members, and this was one of them. So I won't do the whole thing. All right. The 5 people in the photo are in, on, or behind an enormous truck tire inner tube, which hung in its relegated place in my grandfather's garage for years. Fat, sleek, and reflective as a seal, it bears 2 red rubber patches affixed to stem leaks on the tube. Looking at the photo all these years later, I can feel the edges of these patches against my fingers and smell the dust and heated rubber scent as the tube, made untouchable by the burning sun, is flung into the water. It practically sizzles as its mass hits the river and eddies into the current. My brother Mickey, a strong 9-year-old, stands in waist-deep water outside of the tube on the viewer's right, his olive skin dark tanned, his short black hair a glistening wet helmet. If we move into deeper water, he can hang on and stretch his feet out to float, but he is clearly standing and piloting us downstream. In the lower center of the tube, her chin hidden inside its curve, is Toby Berkowitz, whose hand at an odd angle grasps the outside of the tube and is the focal point of the arrangement of figures. Her light brown hair, bleached honey blonde by the sun, is pinned in a crown of braids and shines, and a slightly angled line through her features and fingertips connects her to me. And then to my Aunt Jean, a more perfect composition based on the principle of the diagonal line could not have been arranged by a photographer or painter. It is reminiscent of a harmonious grouping in a Renaissance painting. We all squint our left eyes into the sun, although the right half of each face is cast in shadow. Toby, a ship's figurehead on the great black inner tube, leans eagerly into the adventure. The 2-year-old child that is me appears skeptical of what lies downstream and holds back, but truthfully, I can remember nothing of that day and only read into the photograph the experiences and reflections of a few years hence. The raised eyebrows in a tanned face, a face haloed by wispy hair, bleached white by the sun and pinned out of my eyes with a white bow, are not those of a secure, confident 2-year-old. And maybe my later memories of fear of the water constitute a ghostly presence of dread next to me in the photo. Maybe it is just a quizzical expression, a child beginning to engage with the world around her and trying to figure out what was going on. It is odd how the faded, thinned eyebrows of my old age retain the shape of those strange diacritical marks on the face of a child mirrored in the aging woman. And that probably is the place to stop.
Ruth, I want to thank you very much for coming into my life. I mean, I understand that I'm supposed to work with people that are related to the Alliance community, but it's been a real pleasure helping you with the memoir. It was, you wrote it. All we did was we laid it out and designed it. But to get to know you, and through you, as Jay Greenblatt says, to get a feeling for the 40s and the 50s, in the 60s of Norma and Norma Beach. It's just been touching, and I've very much enjoyed it. If you have not got the book, you can certainly write to Ruth, or write to me, who will tell you how to write to Ruth, and get the book that way. Ruth, do you have any parting words for the assembled crowd?
Yes, I do. First of all, to you and Jay, just I cannot thank you enough. It has been such a pleasure to work with you too, Tom. I hear other writers complain about their editors, and I say, wow, my editor has not only done a wonderful job and been so supportive, but has become a really good friend. And it just amazes me that, when Jay contacted you and I contacted you, you didn't know me from Adam, although we did meet briefly at the reunion. We spoke. Um, but you had no idea. I mean, I could have been writing just total trash as far as you knew. And I'm so grateful to you for giving me the opportunity.